I'm Bill Evans. I'm the new president of Middle Valley Community Center and damn proud of it. And we're here to keep the building alive primarily. So if you have any spare change, we very much appreciate it. If you have a lot of money, we appreciate that too. But we're not here for that. What we're here for is Steve Firtko. And Steve is author of The History of Middle Valley, which I'm sure all of you have read. And if you haven't, there's probably a couple copies around somewhere. Their price is running up on eBay, so get yours as soon as possible. But Steve is here to discuss further implications of the history of Middle Valley, and I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thank you, Bill, for the kind introduction. First, let me say I'm Stephen Firtko. I grew up here in Middle Valley. I've been a trustee of the Middle Valley Community Center for the past 45 years. And during that time, I occasionally served as president, vice president, and treasurer. The Middle Valley Community Center, through its predecessor organization, the Middle Valley Hall Association, traces its origins back to 1891. We are a nonprofit, community-oriented entity, and we're constantly evolving in trying to serve the needs and interests of the community. The centerpiece of our organization is this wonderful building, and this building will be the subject of my presentation tonight. Things we know about this building through the physical evidence, the documentary evidence, and personal recollections. But there are a lot of things we do not know. Within the walls of this structure are secrets about its construction. And they're going to remain secrets unless we tear off the exterior siding or tear down the plaster walls to see what's behind them. And I don't think we'll be doing that. If the Middle Valley Community Center is an evolving organization, this building too is evolving in its use and construction. The building was originally a general store operated by David Miller. David Miller was from Oldwick, and before I go any David Miller, originally from Oldwick, and before I go any further, I'm going to refer to nearby towns by the current names, not the older names, such as Oldwick was known as New Germantown, Long Valley was known as German Valley. So to make it more convenient for the audience, because they're familiar with the current names, I'll do that. Well, he came here to this 140-acre farm in 1792 on what was known as the leased lands, L-E-A-S-E-D. And those lands were owned by the Budd family. And in order to get an idea of what that's about and provide some background information, in 1747, all of Middle Valley was owned by John Budd. And during the 1730s and the 1740s, settlers trickled into the area. So in 1747, John Budd divided his big tract into 10 smaller tracts. And instead of selling the tracts to the settlers, he leased them. And the leases ran for a period of 97 years. And if you do the math, you would figure that in 1844, these leases will expire, would have expired. And 1844 is an important date to remember. I do not know the exact date of construction of the older part of this building, only a date range. My sources will be, or are, the township tax ratables. David Miller first appears on the ratables in 1792 as a trader, T-R-A-D-E-R, and it alternated between trader and merchant until 1805, when he was first assessed for a store. And that assessment was further refined in 1814 as a merchant shop. So I'm inclined to think that this building was probably constructed in the early 1800s. And the older section of the building is the basement down below. In the basement, there is a fireplace. You can see there. And this fireplace is located right about here, such that this is not a full basement for the entire structure. The basement goes from that wall to here. And besides the fireplace down there, there's a large hand-hewn center beam going from that wall to the fireplace. And from the center beam are smaller hand-hewn beams, lateral ones that branch out to the sill beams. And those beams support the floor. This level we have here was probably less open and airy as it is now. Probably following the same construction that they used for the basement, probably with hand-hewn beams up at top there. Also, since there was a fireplace below us right here, there had to be either a fireplace at this level or at the least a chimney going up, and maybe with a cast iron stove here with a pipe to heat the room. The doorway would not have been centered as it is by that end because that's where the chimney and fireplace would have been. So the entrance doorway would have been here, maybe that side, or maybe the entrance was somewhere along this wall, or maybe somewhere along that wall, or even that wall. We don't know. When David Miller first opened the store, how was it operated? They didn't have credit cards, there were no debit cards, there were no scanners. So what he did, he had a store ledger where he wrote down the purchases and the payments of each of his customers. I have a store ledger there from later merchants who were in this building, and I'll explain that to you later. So in his store ledger, customers would come in, they would purchase things, he'd write down what they would have purchased, also the method of payment. By cash, but cash was scarce back then. So they would probably pay in barter. Barter was common. Or also by a personal note, and sometimes these payments were not made until years later. David Miller was a very enterprising man, and in 1802, he established a post office in this building. This post office was the first in Washington Township. And in that regard, he named it Washington. Such that between 1802 and 1852, this was not known as Middle Valley, New Jersey. This was known as Washington, New Jersey. And if you look at the handout I gave you on the top of page 2, there's a map there. And it's this section here. And you can see to the right, there's Chester, German Valley, which is now Long Valley, Schooley's Mountain, Pleasant Grove. And below Long Valley, or German Valley, it says Washington. David Miller was married, had a family. A few of his children died young, but I'm only going to mention 3 of them. The eldest son, William, very intelligent, very smart. He became an attorney in 1818. He was a gifted orator, but unfortunately he died in 1825 at the young age of 27. Another son, Jacob W. Miller, was more of the steady-as-you-go plotting type. He too became an attorney. Established a practice in Morristown in 1823. In the 1830s, he entered state politics, and in 1841, he was elected to the U.S. Senate as a senator from New Jersey and served until 1853. A third son, David W., named after his father, went into the mercantile trade. According to the tax ratables of 1821, David W. was listed as a merchant. In 1822, it has him owning this store. So the father, David Sr., let the son take over the business, sort of stepped back. In 1826, the father moved down to Clinton to a farm he had bought in 1806. And in the town of Clinton, he too opened a general store. But not a post office, because someone already had a post office. Well, he stayed there until 1839, when he more or less retired, sold out in Clinton, moved to Paterson, New Jersey, and stayed there until his death in January of 1844. As I mentioned before, his son David W. took over the store in 1822, and for the next few years, I guess things were okay, but around 1840, his luck began to change. The post office was discontinued. Also, he was facing financial difficulties, and there were instances where he failed to meet his obligation of a promissory note. The State Bank of New Brunswick and the Farmers and Merchants Bank of New Brunswick brought suit against him. A New York merchant, along with a few others, also brought suit against him for non-payment of debts. And in 1843, even his father took him to court for non-payment of debts. But the father was had a change of heart. When he died in January of 1844, in his will, he stated, "I forgive my son David W. of obligations that are owed." So that is nice. But that was in 1844. Did I mention something about 1844?
Yes, you did.
And that was what?
The leases were up.
The leases were up. Very good. The leases expired in 1844. And so the trustees for the Budd family did several things because the Budd family stole all the occupants who were in Middle Valley. They surveyed their own pieces of property, got a survey where they were. They also did an assessment of the value of them at current values at that time. And part of the general agreement was this: the occupants were obliged to buy those properties at about 30% of assessed value. The actual number, I believe, was 29.85%, just in case you wanted to know. So, for David W. Miller, the store in this farm here, that worked out to $2,011.64. I have here a copy of a document signed by Vern W. Budd, one of the trustees for the Budd family, acknowledging receipt of 2 bonds from David W. Miller to be met in 1845 and 1846, and those were the purchase of this farm here, which included the store. And he gives a general description of the bonds, but he also writes, "Payment thereof guaranteed by Jacob W. Miller, David's brother." So, apparently David's credit rating was well known, and as a result, the Budds didn't want their money, so they weren't too sure if David was going to pay, so they more or less required that his brother, the U.S. Senator, pay them if David could not do it. Well, in 1846, David became in possession of the property, whether through his own finances or maybe through his brother's. And what he did the next year was sell. He sold the property. He divided up in 2 parcels. The largest parcel, which was the farmhouse, the barns, and all the land going all the way back to beyond Turtleback Road and some land up here on top of the mountain there, he sold to Jacob Neighbor for $6,000. The smaller parcel, which was this here, included the lot that the store is on. The store is only, or the building is only on 11/100ths of an acre, so it's not that much land. And about 9 acres across the street, he sold to John C. Wells for $1,500. Well, in 1847 he sold, he moved away, eventually wound up with his family in Brooklyn, New York. And in Brooklyn, New York during the 1850s, he got a decent job working for U.S. Customs in their warehouse, and I guess did okay, but by the early 1860s, his health started to decline, couldn't really find steady employment, and he died in 1868. As I said just before, the store and some land across the road there was bought by John C. Wells, who was very young and very ambitious, and he wanted to enter into the mercantile trade. So in order to do that, he borrowed $500 from his father, and unlike David W., I believe he paid his father back. And apparently he was very successful. 13 years later, in 1860, according to the 1860 census, which also asked questions about wealth, John C. Welsh had $3,500 in real estate and $16,500 in personal wealth, or $20,000 in 1860, which was a good chunk of change back then. John C. Welsh, because he had the financial resources to do something, radically changed this building.